14, health and stress. And as you can see over here, there's only 14 slides. One of them title screen, so it doesn't count. This is the learning objectives. It also doesn't count. So really, we're already down to 12 slides. Promise, this is not a very long chapter. It's not that stress is not important. I did my dissertation largely revolving around particular kinds of stress. So it is a very, very important topic to study. It is important in the field of psychology. I think we are in a prime position to study that, being that it is sort of a biological slash psychological thing. So we definitely have at least half of that mastered, and the other half, plays well into what we know. So it's we're in a very good position to study stress. I unfortunately don't feel like our intro book really goes into very much depth. There's a lot of things about stress, issues with stress that I would have put in this chapter were I writing it, but I don't feel like writing a textbook, so I guess we will just go with what we have. So that being said, I know I make this promise every time, and every time it seems like they're longer than the one before. This is actually a short chapter. And the next chapter is on disorders, and unfortunately that's a pretty long chapter because there's a ton of meat in that chapter. But then the last chapter is on therapies, and again, it is very, very short. So we have two really short chapters this section, and then the one sort of long one coming up next. Okay, so let's get started. So we're going to talk about stress. What is stress? Stress is the physiological, almost said that wrong, is the physiological and psychological response to a condition that threatens or challenges a person and requires some form of adaptation or adjustment. So to put it in layman terms, it's something that happens that causes you to a need to react. Okay, some people operate very good under stress. I guess I should say very well. That's horrible English. Sorry about that. Some people operate very well under stress, and some people do not perform well at all under stress. And we'll get into a little bit of the reasons for that. All right, so a stressor, so let's get the definitions out of the way. So a stressor is any stimulus or event capable of producing physical or emotional stress. So again, stress is a very big thing, right? Stress is kind of an umbrella term that can mean several different things, right? You can have physical stress if you have a hard labor type job. I know at at Amazon, they have people that work on the inbound side that it's a physically stressful job, and they have men and women doing that. They don't just put the big guys there. They have tiny little petite girls that are working on the receiving end, which means trucks come in full of boxes, and we can't stow those boxes on pallets the way that they come to us from the manufacturer. So they have to be what they call downstacked. So they have to literally take all these boxes down and build a pallet and then wrap it with shrink wrap so that our transport people can deliver it to the stowers who then put it on a shelf. Well, I work in an extra large warehouse, which means everything that comes in the door is 50 pounds or heavier. So these boxes weigh 50 to 100 pounds. If they weigh more than 100 pounds, then we use machines. But if they weigh up to 100 pounds, it's physical labor. So, and then unfortunately because of COVID, they don't want anybody doing team lifts. So they just basically tell you, yeah, figure it out. Oh, but I only weigh 100 pounds. I'm a little girl, and that box is 100 pounds as well. You want me to just lift it? Yeah, that's what they're told. It's crazy, right? I'm glad I didn't get that job. So obviously some jobs can be physically stressful, and then there's other kinds of physical stressors, right? There's working outside in the temperature, right? It could be very hot, very cold. I know for a while I was sort of connected to the oil industry, and we had guys that were working in oil fields, plugging into tanks and taking out crude oil for delivery, and it's muddy and dirty, and so they're constantly covered in oil and mud. It's a different kind of physical stressor, right? Just being dirty all the time. And then, of course, emotional stress. Jobs that are, tax attorneys during April or maybe May. That's emotionally stressful. Teaching, I feel, can be very emotionally stressful. You have children, especially the younger children, if you have a big heart, right? It's very emotionally stressful whenever you have students that aren't doing well, they don't have the right resources at home. Teachers get very invested emotionally into that. So I've seen teachers get burned out because their students just weren't doing well, and they do and they do and they do for their students, but you can only do so much. And whenever they still are not successful, they feel like they have let their student down. And even though they did everything in their power, um, it's just a very emotionally stressful thing. So stressors can be positive or negative. And what does that mean? So I guess what the book is trying to say here is they're negative events obviously are stressful, like divorce, death in the family, health concerns of yourself or a loved one. Being incarcerated is listed on there, losing a job, and financial difficulty. All these things are negative, right? They don't bring anything, good to your life. So they are negative events, and of course they cause stress. But then there's positive things in your life that also cause stress. So like going on a vacation, that's a very positive thing, right? But the idea of prepping for it is very stressful. I've had vacations that are out of the country. You have to get your passport together. You have to make sure that you understand the currency exchange. You have to get little things. Like if you're going to Europe, they have a different kind of electricity. So you have to have converters for anything that's going to plug into the wall, or you're going to get there and not going to be able to charge your phone because you don't have the right adapters. So, making sure that you have all those things and making sure you didn't forget any of those things, right? You think all of those things through. You might not know stuff like that. I know one time when I was going to Nairobi, right before it was time to go, I realized that I hadn't had any malaria preventatives. So that was kind of a big deal. And with malaria meds, you need to take them for a certain amount of time to build them up in your system before you go. It's not just you don't just pop a pill. Well, you do, but you pop a pill like every 3 weeks. So I was a little bit stressed. I don't want to go there and get malaria, right? Like that's horrible. I probably wouldn't die from it, but it still sucks. So something like going on a vacation, right? A very positive thing can bring forth a lot of stress. And then what about putting your job on hold for a week or 2 weeks or however long you're going? If you have certain jobs, that work is just going to pile up. When you come back, you have to kind of get caught up again. So even though you're having fun on vacation, there's like back voice in your head saying, man, you're going to have a ton of work to do when you get back. Getting a promotion, that's a very stressful thing, right? Obviously very good, right? Moving up the chain, probably an increase in salary, maybe benefits, but added responsibility usually. So that's stressful. Moving, something I've done quite a bit of. It can be a good thing, right? New location, maybe it's a better location. But again, getting all your stuff from point A to point B intact, unscratched, unbroken, not lost, pretty stressful. Getting married, obviously having children, all these things are positive things that bring a lot of stress. So stress comes in all forms, right? Good things and bad things both bring stress. Stress can be good and bad. It can be physical and it can be emotional. So again, that very small word of stress, right, is a very big thing in our lives. So there's something that is mentioned in the book, so I'll mention it here, and I'll tell you why I don't buy into this very much. It's called the SRRS, or the Social Readjustment Rating Scale. Developed by Holmes and Rays. What they did is they took 43 major life events that are fairly typical. Not everybody experiences all of them, but they're pretty prevalent in American life. And they rated them from the most to the least stressful, and everything was assigned a point value. And that sounds like it would be fairly useful, right? It'd be a nice little checklist to go in. Maybe you're going to go see a counselor for the first time. They sometimes will use some version of this or this itself, and it's just check boxes. Have you experienced this? Have you experienced this? Have you experienced this? Yes, yes, yes. No, no, no. Whatever. And then they add up your score, and then they kind of figure out how stressful are you, and they see where that stress comes from. My problem is they gave it sort of subjective measures of stress. The most stressful thing that this list came up with was the death of a spouse. And I get that, right? Some people are lucky enough to have a spouse that they are just soulmates with, madly in love with, and I can't imagine losing that person that was supposed to be your life partner, your best friend, and then they're gone from your life. I mean, I see it in movies, and yeah, I totally see how that could be super stressful. I, myself, can't really relate to that. I have not experienced that, unfortunately, so I have a hard time understanding that. But then the next thing was divorce. And I get that, right? That's very close to death of a spouse, right? You had love, obviously you got married, and then that love went away, and for whatever reason, and so you've lost your spouse. So either way, it's losing a spouse. I get that, all right. So that makes a lot of sense. But then the number 3 thing on that list is what bothers me, and it's death of a child. And I don't know about you, but again, maybe it's just because I haven't found that right person to really experience that level, that depth of love. But if one of my children were to die, I don't think I could function. I don't think I would ever get over it, especially if it was a sudden thing. Not that much, but is much better. I know I had a friend from high school who I was sort of ancillary friends with his sister. She was a little bit younger, but kind of followed her on social media back when I had that. And she had a daughter who had leukemia and went through, the horrible treatments and everything for years and years. And she finally succumbed to her disease when she was like 6 or 7. And it's just heartbreaking. I mean, to see all of that unfold over years because she posted everything on social media, right? Pictures of her daughter and what she's going through. And then I would hear from my friend how she was doing kind of behind the scenes. And she wasn't doing well, obviously. And I just can't imagine. I just think that's 10 times worse, than death of a spouse. So for me alone, I can't give this, my approval because I just don't think I would personally rate those things on the same level of stress as what they came to in their study. And I don't know how they came up with their numbers. But anyway, it's an interesting thing. It's kind of probably a neat thing to have, but I don't really buy into it because I can't relate. All right, moving on. All right, so hassles, uplifts, and I can't say the word hassle without thinking of Hasselhoff. I don't know why, anyway, it's neither here nor there. So, do you know he's the most watched person on TV, or he has logged the most airtime on TV or something? And I think he was finally beat out by Regis Philbin, who's now passed. So, since he's still sort of on TV, he might regain that title. But he's up there. And he also has multiple platinum records in Germany. Like, he's a singer in Germany. He's, like, really, really popular there. I had no idea. Anyway, all right, so hassles are irritating demands that occur daily and may cause more stress than major life changes do. So there's a difference between chronic stress or acute stress, right? So chronic means over time, not Snoop Dogg's kind of chronic. That's a different kind of chronic. So chronic meaning like over a long period of time. So you go to a job and your boss micromanages you, and he sets absolutely ridiculous deadlines for you or goals that are almost impossible to achieve. Some managers do that, right? They think the harder they push you, the harder you're going to work. Little do they know, right? So you go to work and 40 hours a week, constant stress. And then it's not just 40 hours because you come home, you're dreading going to work the next day. You get home, you're exhausted and stressed out from, even though you're home now, you're still thinking about work. So it's really more than 40 hours a week of stress you're experiencing because you experience it even when you're not there. So that is a chronic stress. And then an acute stress would be like you lose your job. So one of the 2 friends that I have in the world, his name is Hal, he lives in Dallas. He worked for Halliburton, and we haven't talked in months. We only catch up every couple of months. And I called him the other day, and I asked him if he was working from home, and he kind of paused and he goes, "Man, we haven't talked in a while, have we?" I'm like, "Nah, man, it's been a minute." And he said, "Yeah, I got laid off from Halliburton." And I was like, "No way!" He's a single dad, and he has full custody of his son. He's got a really big, nice house that he kept. He's like the opposite of every guy I've ever known from divorce. Not to give his business out there, but his wife decided she wanted to play for the other team, so just out of the blue one day, she says, "I want a divorce, and I have a girlfriend, and her and I are going to get together and get married and try to have our own family." So he's like, "Okay, well, I'm keeping my son." So he raises it. He's freaking super dad. I mean, he raises his son, pays for his house, works 2 jobs, or did. And, I mean, it's just a fantastic dad, right? So super model of human being, in my opinion. But he lost his job. And that's super important because he's a sole provider for his son, right? So I was like, "Oh my God, what happened?" Because, well, I just sat down in front of the computer for about 10, 12 hours a day, and I applied for everything that came my way. And about a month later, I had an interview with some small company as a procurement manager, which is basically what I did at Halliburton, and went through 5 interviews, and they hired me, and I start tomorrow. Um, and I was like, man, that's fantastic. And it's a little bit of a pay increase. So, it was a super big acute stress, right? Because it was a situational thing, but it's past. Now 2 months later, he went and he got a severance package from Halliburton, so he actually didn't even lose any money. He was given 3 months of severance, and he was only out of work for 2 months. So he's going to get paid double from his new job and from Halliburton at the same time for this first month. So he went under a lot of stress thinking about the what ifs. What if I'm unemployed? What if I don't get this? What if I don't get that? But in the long run, it's over. So which one of those do you think would be worse? I think a lot of people might intuitively think that an acute stress like that, some big major thing, would cause more sort of damage, right, than the chronic stress. But research actually shows it's the other way around. Those little nitpicky, every single day, driving in Houston traffic, back and forth across town, 5 days a week, going to work, the coffee machine doesn't work, the copier doesn't work very often, your computer goes down. I mean, just all these little, nuisances that you have to deal with, these little hassles, actually build up more and cause more stress than the major stress events. So, anyways, kind of interesting. I feel like that's probably opposite of what most people would think. So there's also something called uplifts, which is kind of the opposite of a hassle. These are positive experiences that then neutralize hassles. So, sometimes you go I get stressed out at the gym because I see people with just absolutely horrible gym etiquette, right? They slam down weights. They don't pick up after themselves. They use multiple pieces of equipment at one time and have the nerve to tell me, oh, no, I'm using that. I'm going back and forth between these two. Well, this isn't your gym. You don't get to do that. So I get stressed out by that because I tend to be fairly aggressive. And so if I see that and I need that equipment or whatever, I'll say something. And, you got a bunch of alpha people at the gym. And so you got a bunch of people that aren't, going to back down, so to say. So anyways, I get very stressed out by that. And then every once in a while, I'll be just maximum. I mean, this happens and then I go over here and then that happens and I go over here and then something else happens and I go over here. It's just one thing after another and it's building and it's building and it's like 5 things in one day. And then there was a guy the other day that was using a piece of equipment, and that's fine. He just got on it, and I'm kind of standing back in the wing, and I'm just waiting. I'm not being creepy and like right on top of him or whatever, but he sees, and he kind of points, and I said, oh, no, take your time. Take your time. When you're done, I'll jump on. No big deal. Take your time. He goes, no, you can work in with me. And I don't really love doing that, but, I mean, we were about the same size doing the same thing, so we didn't have to swap out weight too much. And I was like, are you sure you don't mind? He goes, no, come on, man. And it was just such I was like, oh my God, like this one nice guy, right, that did it right, that did it the way I would do it, the way I think is the way it's meant to be done, made me forget about those other 5 guys. So there's some research that shows how many uplifts do you have to cancel out hassles. And usually in a relationship, it's 5 to 1. I think that's been mentioned in a previous chapter, right? 5 good things to erase 1 bad thing. But when it's not in a relationship, if it's just life, right? If there's not that emotional connection with a person, right, that allows you to build things like resentment, anger towards one individual, those things are really, really hard to overcome. That's why we need that 5 to 1 ratio to get past it. When it's just daily life, interestingly, it's the other way around. So these hassles build up and they cause stress. They cause the release of certain stress hormones, right? Cortisol and all these other things that can be measured biologically. We can tell you, my friend, are stressed out. We can tell it by your blood pressure. We can tell it by your the hormones, your hormone levels. We can tell that you're stressed out. But then these uplifts happen, and one of the best things about that is you got to look for them. Sometimes you just look around the room and you can experience third-party uplifts. I can see somebody over here be nice to somebody else over there, and I'm not even involved in that, and that does my heart good. When I see somebody that lets somebody into traffic that's way up ahead of me, right? That's nice. That's a friendly, and then I see somebody wave Somebody lets them into traffic, somebody waves, they wave back. That exchange for me is an uplift because I generally think people suck at driving. People are mean and rude and self-centered, and I hate being behind the wheel of a car just about. But then I see people that do nice things like that, and it makes me forget about 4 or 5 bad drivers. So, anyways, hassles and uplifts, kind of an interesting thing to look at. Moving on. Now we get into stuff that I just hate teaching this because I think it's kind of common sense. So a couple of ways that stress is dealt with, right? There's something that's, and I hate this term, it's the dumbest term ever. They should come up with something way better than this. But there's something called the approach conflict. It is a conflict arising from having to choose between equally desirable consequences. So things like, where should we eat, right? There's like 10 restaurants I would love to go eat at right now. And that's somewhat stressful because they all sound good. So I have to make a decision between a whole bunch of things that are equally desirable. So it's like, there's no wrong decision really, but I'm going to sit down at that seafood place and I'm going to be thinking about that steak place thinking, dang, steak sounds awfully good. Do I regret coming to a seafood place now? So a little bit of stress involved, even though there are no losers, right? Then there's the avoidance conflict, and this is the opposite. This is when you have to choose between 2 equally undesirable consequences. Like, should I watch that new Adam Sandler Hubie Halloween movie or something with Mark Wahlberg in it? I lose either way, right? Both of those guys suck. I hate all of their movies. Actually, if I'm being honest, a few of their movies are actually good. I just don't like them as people. Mark Wahlberg whines all the time. The dude can bench press a house and he builds himself out to be this like super badass, but every time you hear him talk, he talks like this. He's always whining. And what is up with that? I just don't get that. I just don't like that man. And Adam Sandler's just dumb. Like his stupid humor is that exactly. It's stupid humor. And the voice alone that he does on that Hubie movie, I'm like, I'm not watching that. And it might even have funny moments, but I can't get past that stupid voice. So, point being, 2 undesirable consequences, and I have to choose between 2, certain amount of stress coming into that situation. And then there's the approach avoidance conflict, and that's when the same choice has both desirable and undesirable consequences. Like, I think I wrote this slide right after I got out of a relationship, so that's why you have that, which girl should I date, right? That can be good and bad. You know, if you have 2 equally desirable dates that you have to choose between, right? Then that sucks. Or if you have 2 girls that are the only 2 girls that have answered your dating app and you don't really like either of them, but there's nobody else that's interested and you're tired of being single, and so you're just going to pick one, right? Am I the only one that does that? So both bad options, but you have to choose between 2 bad options. Or maybe you have one person and they have a lot of pros and a lot of cons, right? And so you have to make this kind of, it's desirable and undesirable consequences choice, right? So again, this is not rocket science. That's why I hate that this is even in this chapter. But all right, I like this a little bit better. I can't remember Albrecht's first name off the top of my head, but in the early 80s, really, he did a lot of study on stress in the workplace. So this would kind of fall under industrial organizational psychology. And he has a list of 9 workplace variables. I used I guess an assessment, I guess I would call it, on my dissertation, and it was largely based on his work. So I had to study his works fairly extensively when I was doing my dissertation, and I really like it. I think he did a really, really good job of kind of covering all the bases. I don't think he really missed anything. So, but he boiled it down to 9 workplace variables that cause stress, and what's interesting about them is all of them exist on a spectrum, right? You can have too much or too little of pretty much any of these. And many of them I've personally experienced, so it's easy for me to relate to them. So the first thing, workload, right? You can go to work and just have too much work, right? You're never going to get it all done. And I see that at Amazon because, I mean, you show up and there are just an endless sea of pallets of merchandise, right? And you have store people that are told, go put all that stuff on shelves. you feel like you need to get it all done, right? And so you're working like a maniac trying to just get everything put up as fast as you can. But while you're doing that, more stuff is coming in. So you're never going to get it. You're never going to clear the floor, you know. And if you did, it'd actually kind of be a bad thing because then everybody would be standing around twiddling their thumbs, and they don't want that. So I'm constantly kind of, there's only a few, right? There are those people that are intrinsically motivated that we talked about. They are the ones that are really out there busting their butts trying to get it done. And sometimes I have to tell them, hey, I'm not telling you to slow down, all right? I would never hinder somebody's work ethic, but just understand, no matter how fast you work, you're not clearing the floor, all right? I don't want you to burn yourself out trying, okay? I know one of my very, very first jobs, I was a cashier, and anytime, like Target, I was only there seasonal. I hated that job. But I would look and the line would get kind of long and I would feel like I needed to ring people up like I was in a race, right? Because I know what it feels like to wait in line and think that, oh, this guy's so slow and all that. So, you know, I would just speed everybody through as fast as I could and I would kind of rush them off so I could get to the next person. But then what I found is I always had the longest line because, you know, you kind of survey the cashiers whenever you go in to check out and you look and you're like, oh, that guy's super slow and that woman is super slow and look at this guy. Man, he's fast. Let's get in his line, right? We'll be in and out much faster even though the line is longer. So I was really shooting myself in the foot. I was trying to clear the line so that I was done with all my work for a few minutes, but all I was really doing is inviting more work to come my way. So I've experienced the too much workload stress, and I've also, and I mentioned this I think before, I had a government job that was in telecommunications, and it was connectivity between airports and within airports if they needed it, but often they didn't need it, and there was an existing backbone network. So basically, if we got an order, I would just route it from point A to point B on an existing network, which took like 10 minutes. And then I would turn it over to the people that would physically go do what I built in the computer, literally tying the wires together and whatnot. So my work would take 10 minutes if I got an order, and I sometimes went weeks with no order. And I would go to my boss, and because I am a worker, and so I would go to my boss and go, hey, what can I do in the meantime? And he would go, nothing. Is there some kind of like maintenance work that I could do? Is there some kind of efficiency planning? Is there some kind of report I can write? I mean, there's got to be something that I can do. Nah, you're good. Nah, you're good. Just enjoy. And that was super stressful to me because this was a government contract, and I felt like, man, if they knew that they were paying us all this money, because it paid pretty well, to do nothing, I don't think that we would keep this contract. And we're towards the end of a 10-year contract right now. I don't think that they're going to renew it. They're going to probably go with a competitor that's more efficient than this. And sure enough, I was right. So I got out right before that. But, it was very stressful to not have enough work because then you think, well, I'm not needed. They're going to get rid of us. They're going to lay us off. They're going to reduce our hours, reduce our pay, something. So workload is a huge one. Clarity of job description and evaluation criteria. You know what? I was thinking I have to sneeze and I don't want to sneeze. I'm in the middle of a lecture, and so I did a half, and it went away. And those are the worst kind of sneezes. That sucks. Made my eyes water too. All right. Clarity of job description and evaluation criteria. When jobs are too rigidly defined, it's boring, right? It's by the numbers, do this, and you're a robot, and you can leave your brain in the car, right? You don't need to bring it into work because everything is defined for you, and there's no creativity, there's no individual initiative, there's no, thinking outside the box, thinking through things. It's just follow orders, That's kind of sucks. I wouldn't like that. But sometimes you have a job where they're like, hey, go do this. And they don't really tell you what to do, right? So that oil and gas company that was kind of my job for a while, they gave me first a dispatcher position, but then that didn't make any sense because I was in Dallas, or actually a suburb of Dallas called Mesquite, but I was in basically Dallas, dispatching oil trucks in Montana. And I'm wearing shorts and t-shirts, and they're driving through 8-foot snowbanks. So that wasn't going to fly. So the dispatching positions became localized because you're more familiar with the weather, and then they're like, well, we have to come up with something for you. So they listed me as the communications manager. And I said, okay, well, what do you want me to do? And they said, well, there's communications equipment on those trucks, and sometimes they break, and we're actually going to switch over to a new one pretty soon, so we need somebody that's like in charge of all that. And I said, what does that mean to be in charge of it? Am I like IT when they break? And they said, no, we have an IT person that, they call whenever there's some malfunction. Well, then what is my job? And they never told me what my job was. I literally had to scramble and like figure out what I could do, what wasn't being done that needed to be done, and then I had to figure it out. And then I had to write my own job description to have posted and my own SOPs that I was supposed to follow, but I'm the one writing the rules that I have to follow. It's very weird. Had that been a real job and not kind of a front job, I would have hated it. I would have absolutely probably been looking for something else. Physical variables, I mentioned this before, it can be too hot, too cold, too noisy. There can be pollution, too much physical labor, all kinds of things that not everybody is suited for. Some people like that. Some people like to be out in the cold. I don't know. Some people like to have physical jobs, right? They want the exercise. So these are all very individualized. Job status. If you have low job status, right? If you're like the very bottom of the barrel, kind of feel low self-worth. But if you have very high status, the CEO or something of a company, well, that's very stressful. So it's very stressful to be at the very bottom of the totem pole and know that everybody kind of looks down on you and you have absolutely no say-so, but it also sucks to be at the top. Accountability, you can have too much responsibility over others. Again, being the leader carries its own inherent stress. Or you can have too little accountability, right? And then you think, well, I don't really matter. I go to this job and I do what I do and nobody knows what I do. I'm one of 1,000 people that does the same thing, right? Maybe you're like we have several janitors at the building that I work at, and I don't know that they have any kind of rhyme or reason as to, okay, you sweep this sector and you sweep that sector and you pick up pieces of wood and you sweep the floors and you clean the back. I don't think it's just go clean, because I've talked to one or two of them and they all kind of have told me the same thing. Oh, it's great, man. We can just wander around the building as long as we look busy. It's cool. So they just walk behind a broom and they're just kind of casually pushing the broom. Meanwhile, there's areas of the building that need to be cleaned that nobody wants to tackle, but nobody gets in trouble for it because nobody's assigned to do that. So it's run very oddly, but there's no accountability. So people like it because they can just kind of hide in the shadows, so to speak. But they also talk about, this is just a temporary job and, I'm only going to do it for a little while, that kind of thing. So accountability is important. Task variety. I've worked on an assembly line when I was 18, 19 years old, something like that. And I don't know how people do it. I didn't do it for very long, and then I became the material handler that supplied the assembly line with all the materials. That was much better because every station kind of had its own schedule. This guy needs a box of screws like once a week, right? Because there's like 4,000 screws in a box, right? But this guy needs plastic feet that go on the bottom of those computers that he's building. There's only like 50 of those in a box, and they do about 50 an hour. So every hour I got to bring him that. So I had different jobs, right? All these different stations that had like their own timelines, and so I had to kind of manage my time and organize things. And so there was a lot of mental stimulation there. As simple as that job was, right? It was kind of tricky. But those people that were on the assembly line just screwing the same part to the same computer for months and months and months and months on end, I didn't understand this at the time, but it was pretty brilliant because I would watch these people. They would talk to each other from across the line, and meanwhile they're like, bzz, 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 yeah, bzz, 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 yeah, bzz, 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 and they would be talking and moving at a much faster rate physically than I feel like I could do. And they're actually hitting these screw holes and doing. I mean, they were so good at that station because they had done it for a while. It was just muscle memory. They didn't even really have to focus, right? So what I didn't understand is every couple of months, everybody would move one place to the left. So now you got this guy that was hitting these screw holes, no problem, and now he's over here and he's clipping together these like plastic clips that are kind of little, and maybe that was kind of hard for him to do, and so it's taking him a little. So that guy that was killing it on this station sucks on this station. And I didn't understand why they would do that, because from an efficiency standpoint, it didn't make sense, because I was only seeing it from the short term, right? In the long term, if everybody is mentally unstimulated because they can do their job in their sleep through muscle memory, right? Then you get a lot of burnout, you get a lot of turnover, you get a lot of people that quit. So it was important, even though that guy's going to suck on that next station, he's going to get better and better, and then he's going to get really good, and then right about that time, you're going to move him somewhere else, which can be kind of frustrating because you get good at something and then they take it away and move you to something else, but it's because they want you to stay mentally stimulated, right? It's not rocket science. It's a pretty simple job. All the positions are pretty simple once you learn them. So you're going to move down the assembly line and then back to the beginning, and then you're going to constantly do that, right, every couple of months. So that task variety is pretty important. But again, on an individual level, some people like going to work and doing the same thing every day because they know what to expect. I don't understand those people. I'm definitely not like that. Next one is human contact. Again, like all the other ones, individual preferences, right? Some people need or want a great deal of human contact, and some want almost none. I've been on both ends of that spectrum. I'm towards the latter now. I don't really like people anymore. Physical challenge, some people want a lot, some people want a little. Mental challenge, some people want a lot, some people want a little. Burnout, which I mentioned, is a lack of energy, exhaustion, and pessimism that results from chronic stress. There's a lot of things that cause burnout. There's tons and tons and tons of studies out there about what causes burnout, and there is no one particular cause. But kind of the symptoms of being burned out are just being tired. You're exhausted. You don't care. You kind of get depressed. You stop sort of taking pride in your work. And ultimately, a lot of people end up quitting, or not necessarily quitting because some people can't afford to quit, but what they end up doing is self-sabotaging. So they burn out, and because they're burnt out, they go into work late. Well, because they're going into work late, they start getting written up, and they don't care. So whatever. Then they take long lunches. Then they sneak out a little bit early. And then they kind of start getting lax on the rules. And before you know it, they end up getting fired. So they get fired because they were burned out, and they basically let the company make that decision for them because they can't justify quitting because they need the job to pay the bills. So they end up just doing such a subpar work that the company makes that decision for them. So burnout is something that management needs to be very aware of and fight against. And that's why it's important to kind of have an understanding of these 9 things as a manager and make sure that we're kind of in that Yerkes Dodson middle point of that bell curve, right? Where we're giving them the right amount of workload, the right clarity of job description, the right physical variables as much as we can. Because again, they're all individual. So, you kind of want to create a framework of workload for the masses, right? That's not too much or too little. But some of your people are still going to be underutilized and overutilized. So you might want to give those people just a little more work than the average worker. And then these other, maybe take a few of the things off of their plate. So, you make your general rules for, what's in the middle, and then you kind of tweak it for the individual if you have that luxury. All right, I'm skipping this stuff. I've already talked about most of it. Don't worry about these. The health psychology, we've talked about that in other chapters. Positive psychology, I've talked about that, so I'm skipping that. Fight or flight response. Fight or flight is something we've all heard of. It's a response to stress in which the sympathetic nervous system and the endocrine glands prepare the body to either fight or flee from a stressor. So if you look at the newer research on fight or flight, they've added a third, and this just is a pet peeve of mine. Something, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Basically, if there's a situation, right, that we're faced with, sometimes people will fight their way through it. Sometimes people will run away from it. That's basically your 2 options. They said, what if you do nothing? What if you just freeze? You're not fighting, but you're also not running, so it doesn't fit neatly into those 2 categories. So we need a third category, and we'll call it, so that it rhymes, we'll call it fright. So we can fight, flight, or fright in response to some kind of stressor. Okay, I guess you got me on a technicality, so we'll go with that. So now fight or flight is also known as the fight, flight, or fright response. I kind of hate that, but I kind of see where they're coming from, so whatever, it is what it is. I think this is kind of interesting when you watch those Halloween scare things or whatever, where somebody is talking, and then have you seen the one where this guy pops up out of a big garbage can, and instantly when it happens, the guy goes boom and just punches him in the face, right? That's obviously fight. And then sometimes people go and they run, the other way. There's your examples, right? Fight or flight. So where does this come from? How come this guy's punching somebody in the face and then this person's running away? Where is that? Just we're born one or the other? Is that something that can be trained? Um, these are all interesting questions, and I've looked into this a little bit, and it really comes. And actually, we haven't gotten to it yet. I'll get to it in here in a little bit, but it depends on what tools are in your toolbox, right? And everybody kind of has a self-evaluation of what your resources are. Some people know how to fight, right? They're not afraid of somebody from a physical standpoint, right? They've been in lots of fights. Maybe they've had some training. They know how to fight. So they're not particularly afraid of another person. So when that person pops up, right, they immediately take a defensive stance, right, and they're ready to go. Not everybody has that training, right? Some people don't, and so their instinct is, I need to run away. I don't want to be hurt. And I'm not judging, right? It is what it is. You either have that training or you don't. I have this picture here, right? This is a Navy SEAL team. Do you think they would be the type that would run? Or do you think they would face Navy SEALs have some of the most training of any other position in the military, of all four branches of military, right? They're cross-trained in everything, right? Close quarter combat, depending on what team they're assigned to, what kind of terrain they fight in. There's jungle, there's cold weather, there's mountain. They're cross-trained in that. They parachute out of planes. They're trained on not only our weapons, but whatever region they typically operate in. They're trained on those weapons, like AK-47s, things that are popular in another part of the world, but we don't use. They're trained there because what if you go there on a mission and you run out of ammo and you got to use you got to pick up an enemy's gun. Well, it doesn't do you any good if you don't know how to use it. So, the amount of training that they get is just absolutely insane. So when you put them into any kind of stressful situation, do they experience stress? Sure, they're human, right? They're going to experience a certain level of stress, but is it going to be as measurable as the average person? I would argue no. And some of the research that I've looked at that's done by the military says the same. No. And the reason for that is because their toolbox is just humongous, right? You put something difficult in front of them and their thought is, all right, how are we going to do this, right? Overcome, go through it, go over it, go around it, we'll figure something out, right? You put an insurmountable task in front of other people and that's what they focus on is, how are we going to do that? I don't know how. What are we going to do? And because of their level of training, right, the number of tools in their toolboxes, they just simply don't think that way. So this fight or flight definitely can be, oh man, somebody from Lone Star is calling me. Can I answer the phone in the middle of a lecture? Hang on one second. Hello? It's an automated call about spring registration. That was inappropriate timing. All right, so anyways, it's an interesting thing, right? And if you're one of those people that tends to run away from problems, which a lot of people do, by the way, whether it's problems at work, problems in your relationship, if you find yourself sort of constantly retreating from that, these people that don't like conflict, all right, this is just me on a soapbox and my personal feeling on this. I don't think conflict is bad. I think a lot of times people are afraid of conflict because they don't know how to do it. They don't feel comfortable with, well, what happens if emotions get tied into it? What happens I'm not going to tell that person to get off his phone in the middle of a movie because what if he yells at me? Or what if he tries to come over to me and beat me up or something like that? Now, I'm not saying be confrontational in every situation, right? Again, everybody's got their limits and you can only do what you can do. But if you're talking about like a relationship type thing, right, and your spouse or your significant other is doing or saying or acting in a way that is not okay with you and you just bottle it up because you're afraid to say anything about it, you need to ask yourself why. Why are you so afraid to fight this? Why are you leaning towards flight instead of fight? And if it's well, I don't know how to talk to him, whatever the rule, if it's I don't know how to talk to him, or if it's well he's just going to blow up, so you're already prescribing a response. You're already saying what you think is going to happen in the future to a situation that you haven't even addressed. All of these. This is kind of what happens in therapy, right? We look at your fight or flight response, and if there is flight, and that is not necessarily the best option because you should stand up for yourself in certain situations. Why is that? What tools are you missing to not be able to appropriately fight through that response? And let's try to give you those tools. Better communication tools, stronger sense of self-worth, whatever it is that you need to do will kind of help you with that. So that is really the only takeaway from this whole fight or flight that I think is kind of useful. All right. I don't like this. This is in the book. Whatever. I'm going to fly through it once because this is like good for one test question or whatever. General adaptation syndrome is the predictable sequence of reactions that organisms show in response to a stress. This is pretty much, self-explanatory, I think. So the first is the alarm stage, where you experience a burst of energy that aids in dealing with a stressful event. So something stressful happens, and you get that rush, right? That sense of adrenaline that goes on. Biologically, from an evolutionary standpoint, there's theories as to why that happens. You get that sense of adrenaline, and the next thing you know, you get sort of tunnel visioned on that, whatever that issue is. You sort of are not paying attention, right? That selective attention comes into play. You're not so much paying attention to the rest of the room, unless there's other threats there, right? But if you know that there's a singular threat, you tend to focus on that. And in extreme cases, and I'll tell you about. I had a call one time, and this guy was trying to commit suicide by cop. And he came and he basically challenged me in a parking lot, and one thing led to another, and then he fled, and I chased him to his house. Not high speed, just low speed chase. And he goes to his house, and I try to arrest him in the front yard. I'm still by myself at this point, and he runs into the house, and I'm kind of tussling with him, and he gets to the kitchen, and he goes straight for the knife block. And he pulls out a knife, and I'm still grabbing onto his hoodie from behind. And as he pulls out the knife, I mean, I can still picture that. I could pick that knife out of a picture of 100 different knives. That's how much I was focused on that knife, right? I mean, at this point, it had just been, he's pulling and tugging, trying to get away, and I'm pulling and tugging, trying to get him under control. But, that's not really a fight. I mean, he's not throwing punches or kicks or elbows. He's not trying to bite me. Doesn't have any weapons. I'm not really thinking about, the weapons that I'm carrying. I didn't need them at that point. But now he's got a knife, and it was a big friggin' knife. So it changed everything. And I finally got a sense of adrenaline, right? I didn't get it before that because we were pretty evenly matched, I think, physically. He was shorter than me, but a little more muscular, a little bigger. We were about the same age. So, I mean, I felt like it was a pretty even, fair fight, so to speak. So, and this is a pretty common thing. I worked in a rough part of town, so, not a lot of adrenaline going on. But again, I've been in tons and tons of fights, right? Both, recreationally because I do jiu-jitsu and because I work where I work, right? So, fights kind of easy. But I hadn't been in a knife fight before. So as soon as that was introduced, right, I had this alarm stage, right? And that adrenaline kicked in, and I felt faster and stronger, and my reaction time, I think, got a little better, right? All of that happens because of adrenaline. And that's why, you'll see sometimes if you watch, some like real footage of stuff like that. I mean, let's say he slashed me 5, 6, 7, 8 times, which happens in a knife fight, right? You're going to get cut. You can take those, you don't even notice them, right? And you'll be bleeding all over the place, and not until after it's over are you like, ow, right? They're not incapacitating wounds while you're in that stage. That's what adrenaline does, all right? It gets you through those situations. And so, again, from an evolutionary standpoint, that adrenaline kicks in and makes you superhuman enough to get through whatever the stressor is. So the second stage is resistance, and that's where you have intense physiological efforts to either resist or adapt to the stressor. So basically fight or flight, right? That adrenaline kicks in, and then it allows you to resist by either fighting and taking on the stressor, or resist by running away as fast as you can. Or I guess we have the fright rather, sorry. And then the last stage, because we're all human, well, with the exception of Chuck Norris, uh, exhaustion, right? We can't live this state for very long, right? We get this adrenaline rush. It comes and goes relatively quickly. We can't stay up on this adrenaline for days. And I love the scene in the early seasons of Walking Dead. Something I just hadn't thought of. There was a scene, remember the girl Sophie, the one that was Carol's daughter? And she was, had disappeared. Well, before she disappeared, Rick and Sophie were trying to outrun two walkers before they really learned how to fight them. So they were just trying to run. And he stopped at one point and he told her to hide. And he was going to try to go and basically fight them. And he said, they won't stop. They don't get tired. I do. And I hadn't thought of that before. That just hadn't crossed my mind, that these walkers, right, these zombies, don't feel exhaustion, right? They also don't feel adrenaline, right, probably. Although they might, right, whenever they get into a frenzy, whenever they're about to make a kill or as they're making a kill, right, they do seem to move a little faster. So maybe they do sort of have this. But anyway, I know it's a movie or a television show, but it was an interesting, they had the adrenaline, the resistance, they ran away, but then he got to that exhaustion stage and he recognized that, look, I can't run forever and these things can. So I'm going to have to change tactics here. I'm going to have to try to take them on. So there's your Walking Dead reference. All right. Lazarus, you might remember him from a previous chapter where we were talking about the different, I can't think of what they're called now. The Cannon Bard and the Schachter and Springer and all those different responses to stress. Well, this is that Lazarus guy again. He basically says we make a primary appraisal of the situation, right? So it's a cognitive evaluation of a potentially stressful event to determine whether its effect is positive, irrelevant, or negative. So that makes sense. Something happens, and we go, is this good, bad, or is it kind of indifferent? Like, right? So what are we doing here? Well, we're kind of comparing it to previous experiences, right? So this is part of the reasons that children cry a lot, because they experience something new. They don't have a frame of reference. They can't really, they're trying to do this. They're trying to make an appraisal of the situation. Is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Or is it something, especially, this is why Piaget says that children cry around strangers, because they don't know if the stranger is going to be positive or somehow negative or doesn't really matter. They don't have any frame of reference for this, right? There's no schema to connect it to. So because that, they have this cognitive dissonance where they don't know what to expect. They don't like that feeling. And so the way that they deal with stress is by crying, right? Because crying usually means mommy's going to come and protect you and take care of the stressor. So that is their mechanism, is they can't fight it, right? They're 2, 3, 4 years old or whatever. Obviously they can't fight. They can't really run away from it. So they don't really have any tools in their toolbox at all. And so their tool is mom. And how do you get mom? Well, you cry, and then mom will come protect you. So all this kind of ties in somewhat to some of the developmental stuff that we've talked about. So we're making a cognitive evaluation of a potentially stressful event, right? We're looking at whether or not there's going to be harm or whether harm has been done by this new entity's presence. We're looking at the level of threat, right? Is it a very high threat, a very low threat? We're looking at the challenge. This might be a positive interaction. So we make a primary appraisal, and then we make almost immediately a secondary appraisal. This is a cognitive evaluation of available resources. So this is what I've been talking about. And options prior to deciding how we're going to deal with it. So first we need to say, is this good or bad? Does this need intervention or probably not? Can I just ignore it? Do I need to act? Do I need to run? Those are my options, right? While we're making this, we're sort of simultaneously making a secondary appraisal where we're evaluating our own coping resources. Physically, am I healthy? Am I energetic? Do I have a lot of stamina? I'll tell you a story I should not tell. I got into a bit of an argument with somebody one time in a parking lot, and it had black asphalt, and I was wearing kind of sandals, like flip-flops, right? And we both kind of started walking towards each other, and I know from experience, footwork in a fight is very important, right? And you need to be able to know your angles and step out of somebody's, primary zones and everything, and so you have to be able to move pretty quickly with your feet. We can't do that in sandals, so I kicked my sandals off, which makes sense, right? I can move around a little better, but it was black asphalt. My feet were on fire. I immediately regretted that. It was a lose-lose situation. Can't fight in sandals. Can't fight barefoot on this thing. There's no grass to move this to or whatever. So I basically just kind of had to retreat. I had to go back, kick the sandals back on my feet, or otherwise I'd have blistered, and it just wouldn't. So I had to kind of run away from that situation. So that was a physical situation. Now, could I have handled myself in that situation in a better environment? Absolutely. If I had tennis shoes on, I probably would have made a much more horrible choice, right? But because of the environment, right, of where I was, not a good idea. What if you get into words? You're by yourself at a bar, if you're that kind of person, and you get into words with somebody, but he's got 6 friends. Things like that, right? You're taking a secondary appraisal of the situation. There might be a threat, there might be harm. You might be able to normally take that, but then you kind of zoom out and you go, oh man, there's 6 of them. Maybe I better just swallow my pride and tuck my tail and walk the other way. We're looking at our social support. Now, it's not just physical things that we're talking about, right? These can be for emotional situations that come up, right? So we're evaluating our psychological skills. Do we have the self-esteem to stand up for ourselves? Do we have the proper morale to sort of stand on principle? Do we have the right material to fight this? I've been in a situation where I had a very good lawsuit against the company, but I knew that they were going to drag it through the courts for years and years and years and years because they had a full-time legal team, and that means that I'm going to have to pay a lawyer for years and years and years. And ultimately, if I won any money, I'd have lost it. I'd have paid it all to the lawyer. So it wasn't worth the stress and the time. So, materially, I couldn't fight that fight. So we're looking at all of these things kind of at the same time. And that stress is the stress response, right? Whether we take it on, run away from it, or simply choose to ignore it. The stress response is a function of whether or not your resources are adequate to cope with the threat and how severely your resources will be taxed. So did I have the money to do that lawsuit? Yes. But it would have taken everything I had. So ultimately, is it worth that? No, not really. I might have even won, but it wasn't worth taxing those resources, right? Physical health, all right? Maybe you could win that physical confrontation with that person, but you've got a whole day planned where you're going to go to the park and you're going to do all these things with your kids, and now you spend 5 minutes in a fist fight with somebody and you got a black eye and a busted lip. Are you going to want to go to the park? Are you going to want to spend that physical? No, your resources are going to be depleted and it's going to ruin your day. So just walk away, right? So Lazarus' theory of stress is, again, pretty intuitive. You make a primary and a secondary appraisal almost simultaneously, and then you decide based on your resources. So again, if you have a lot of resources, right, you're going to be more likely to take on that stressor. If you don't have a lot of resources, you're going to be more likely to flee from it. So you can always build up these resources. All of these things are things that you can build. You can add your social network, right? You can add to your health, your energy, your stamina, right? Take care of yourself. You can add psychological skills, right? You're all doing that now, taking this class. You can add to your material possessions, right? You can, buy tools and equipment. That might be training, for certain kinds of training, self-defense classes, things like that. So all of these tools can be additive. So if you look at your toolbox, if you have an honest self-appraisal right now, and you look at your toolbox and it's kind of empty, then you can add to that, all right? You're not doomed to run forever, okay? All right, coping. Coping is efforts through action and thought to deal with demands that are perceived as taxing or overwhelming. So we all have different levels of coping mechanisms. We talked about those Freudian defense mechanisms, right? Those are all coping skills. Most of them are not particularly good. If you remember the first part of that list, the first 7 or 8 probably are fairly bad. Then they start getting a little better, and the last couple are fairly good coping mechanisms. But that's what coping is. So we've kind of already mentioned this before. There's kind of 3 ways to cope, right? You can focus on the problem. This is a direct response aimed at reducing, modifying, or eliminating a source of stress. So you're in a relationship that's very, very stressful. You leave the relationship, right? You go to a job that's very, very stressful. You look to find a new job, right? You focus on the problem. Whatever that problem is that's causing you stress, get rid of that problem, okay? Seems simple enough. Sometimes you just can't do that, right? So sometimes we have to switch to an emotion-focused coping. So let's say you're in a job that is very stressful, but you can't do anything else. Maybe you don't have an education and you have maybe worked your way up at your company into a position that for that company you're qualified for, but no other company would hire you that high. You just don't have the education. You don't really have tons of experience. You have maybe one company. Um, Maybe you started off as the front desk receptionist, but you've worked your way up into like some sort of like low level management, right? And maybe you're making 50,000 a year. Well, that's pretty good for somebody with high school and nothing else, and no real experience in anything. So, but the job is super stressful, and so you are stressed out all the time. But you can't problem focus cope. You can't leave the job that's causing you stress because you can't afford to. So we go to an emotion-focused coping. In other words, we reframe the problem. We say, you know what, why am I stressed? Well, I'm stressed because, I have too much work to do and not enough training. And I'm stressed to do because, all of my coworkers are single and they're always going to happy hours and they want me to go. But, I'm in a relationship and I don't think it's appropriate for me to be hanging out in bars while my husband is at home. I just don't think that's an appropriate lifestyle. And so I don't want to do that, but it's causing me stress with my coworkers who look at me now as an outsider, and so I don't know what to do. All those things are stressful. That is a legitimate thing to be stressed about, but you can reframe that and you can say, you know what? I'm happy that I have a job. I am very lucky to be working. I am lucky to make the salary that I make, given the fact that I have only high school and no previous work experience. Sure, I might not be the most popular at work socially, but I'm very competent at my job. And all that effort that they spend in front of the water cooler, talking about football and what you do this weekend and all that, I'm spending at my desk learning how to do my job better, or maybe cross-training my job with something else, so I'm even more valuable to the company. So, you start focusing on the positives instead of focusing on the negatives, and the next thing you know, you're less stressed. Okay, so that's emotion-focused coping. And then the last one is proactive coping. And, it's crazy to me that this isn't like the first thing that pops into people's minds sometimes, but we had when I was doing psychotherapy briefly, we had a patient that was physically okay, let me put it to you this way. Her sisters, she had two sisters, and they were gorgeous, like easily could be models, face, body, everything beautiful. She was not. And now she had medical issues that she had thyroid issues and other things that caused her to, be much more manly looking in appearance and much larger overall. And her sisters just were ruthless. And they would get together once a week with their parents and have dinner together every like Sunday night or something. They were all like, married and out of the house and whatever. It was just a very tight-knit family, I guess. They were like married, but they were like in their mid-20s, right? All three of them are. And she hated it because every time she went, most of the night was everybody talking about how she needs to diet and exercise and get lipo and, plastic surgery and look better. And she's never going to get a man looking that way. And obviously, who wants to go listen to that every single week, right? Well, what do you think the first thing that we told her was? Don't freaking go. Look, your sisters are bitches. I mean, that's just the bottom line. They're bitches, and you need to not be around them. So you need to proactively take control of your life and tell your parents, I'm not going to come over. I'm not going to sit there and listen to them rag on me the entire time that we're eating. And the parents were kind of neutral. They didn't really jump in too much. It was really just the sisters. And so, put your parents in a position where they talk to the sisters and tell them to shut up. Or how about they stand up for you? That might be good too. So there's a lot of issues going on here that could be solved. But the easiest thing to do is just don't go. You shouldn't have to subject yourself to that sort of environment. So proactive coping is just avoiding occurrences that are going to bring you stress, right? That seems pretty self-explanatory, but it's crazy to me the people a lot of times like she didn't feel like she had a choice. Not going was never even on her radar. Never even thought about saying that I can't go because she can. She can go. She just doesn't want to go. And saying I don't want to come over might hurt the parents' feelings, and she doesn't want to hurt their feelings, and so it just wasn't an option. So she has to go. Well, no, you don't. What you have to do is learn to communicate better. That tool that you're missing is communication. And you should be able to tell your parents, look, I'd love to come see you guys and spend time with you, but it's painful for me to listen to the things that I have to listen to. I can't do anything about these things because of my medical issues, and I don't need them, who are unaware of many of those issues, telling me what I should do all the time. So, for that reason, I'm not coming. Now no feelings are hurt. Now your feelings aren't hurt, and pretty much everybody wins. Anyways, so these are kind of the three ways that we can focus on our decisions. Other factors that lead to positive coping. So again, these are just tools in your toolbox, right? Optimism, the ability to find good in bad situations. So this is sort of the opposite of cynicism. I guess because of law enforcement and some of the other jobs that I've had, peeking behind the curtain of society, I'm very cynical, very distrustful of people, and so I'm the least optimistic person because of my real world experience. But I'm wired to be optimistic. What sucks about that is that, especially like for relationships, like I'm very optimistic. Like, oh, she'll change. Oh, things will get better with time. Dude, it's been 4 years. It's been 7 years. It's been 11 years. That's my 3 long relationships, right? And I'm like, yeah, but it's getting better. So I have this like hardwired optimism, but then I have the reality of people don't change. And she's lying. And, I know my own defense mechanisms that I'm very obviously employing, right? Denial and all these other things, right? And I can see that I'm using them, right? So obviously I'm protecting the fact that I know this isn't going to get any better. So yeah, I kind of get this optimism, pessimism thing all in a nutshell. All right, one of the things that is talked about a lot now is something called hardiness or grit. It's a combination of 3 psychological qualities: commitment, control, and challenge, shared by people who can handle high levels of stress and remain healthy. There was a great book, and it was written, I don't have it up here. I can't remember where I left it, but I can't even remember the name of it now. I want to say it's called Grit. It was written by Angela Duckworth, that's her name, and it was a New York Times bestseller. It was recommended to me by my department chair, and I was like, okay, I'll read that. And it didn't particularly apply to me, but I definitely see its usefulness. Here's the interesting thing about the book. So Angela Duckworth was a she's not dead, is a brilliant woman, very, very highly educated. Went to like top-notch schools. I want to say maybe Harvard. I don't know if that's right, but Harvard or Stanford or one of the Ivy Leagues, straight A's, all that stuff. But she had a dad like mine, right? You can do better, you can do better, you can do better. That's not good enough. Nothing's ever good enough, right? So she was always pushing herself to, better and better and better, but also had this big sense of self-doubt, even with all these, very, very high-end degrees and everything. So she got a job at this management consulting firm in Manhattan, a very, very high-paying job. And one of their clients was West Point. And West Point is the military academy. In order to get into West Point, you have to have 3 things. You have to have grades that are basically perfect. You have to also have athletics. And that doesn't just mean, oh, I was on the football team, right? You have to be the captain of a football team. You have to be like All-American. You have to be, Olympic caliber, basically. Like you have to have some kind of athletic resume that is super impressive. Not just, oh, I ran for 9 touchdowns last season or something like that. Well, were you at a 3A high school? Because we're not impressed by that, right? So stellar grades, stellar athleticism, and a personal recommendation from a sitting congressman. So That's the people that are at West Point, all right? These are the cream of the crop, the top 1%, right? How can you be that and then get into West Point and flunk out in the first 6 weeks? It happens. There's a lot of washouts. And West Point couldn't figure it out. They couldn't figure out how are these kids that are the best of the best of the best coming here, and we're not pushing them all that hard. I mean, we push them, we challenge them, and tons of people graduate, so obviously it can be done, but then all these people flunk out and fail. Like, why? How is that even possible? So they hired the company that she worked for to come in and look at it, and this is what she came up with, that people lack grit. And it was interesting how she came up with that. She was actually talking to like a groundskeeper or something at West Point. Just a guy that'd been on for a long time, just an old wise man with no academic training or anything like that. Guy just mows the lawn basically. And she's like, yeah, what do you think makes people, and she wasn't interviewing him. It was just like a sidebar conversation. And the guy goes, well, back in my day, we had grit. We worked through our problems. A lot of these kids these days, they face adversity. They just go the other way. And she started thinking, well, that makes a lot of sense. You got some kid that goes to school and he's really good at learning, what you learn in high school, right? And they do really well. And it's like everything they've ever done, they've had the Midas touch. They do it well. But now they face something at West Point that's different. They haven't done this stuff before, and they're not the best at it. And so a lot of times, the best way not to fail is to quit. Right? If I just walk away from something, well, I didn't get kicked out. I didn't flunk. I didn't try and fail. I just walked away. I didn't want to do that anymore. And that's what was happening. Anyway, her book is really, really good. It talks about like how to be more gritty, like how to get that, right? How to grab control of things that, you may not feel like you have control over, how to challenge yourself, push yourself a little harder. So again, I didn't feel like it was particularly, didn't speak to me, but I definitely think it was a good book. It was a good read. All right, other things that provide coping: religion, obviously. A lot of people lean heavily into religion whenever they're facing adversity, especially in matters of life and death, health issues, loss of a loved one, things like that. Religion can be very, very important. I know my mom's never stepped foot in a church since I've known her, and never owned a Bible, and doesn't talk about religion, doesn't talk about heaven or hell, I don't have any idea what her beliefs are, until her mom was sick and dying in the hospital and then passed away maybe 6 months later. And, she talks about how her mom's in heaven, and she talks about, she misses her mom and all that, but she's in a better place. And, I just suddenly saw her use religion. Never used it before. I went through bankruptcy, went through all kinds of issues, never heard her praying through those situations, but when it became life or death, all of a sudden religion was the go-to coping strategy. So I think religion's great for that reason, for people that need it for that. Social support is a very good coping mechanism, right? Friends and family can help get you through a lot of things, right? Therapists, I would put in with that as social support. That they bring a lot of positive things to somebody that's struggling, people that need to vent out their problems. Locus of control is the extent to which you can control your environment and accept limitations of that control. That's a very hard concept for me to grasp, because let's say, for instance, you are I'm going to use driving again. Let's say you're driving and there's somebody in the left lane on the freeway that's going 50 miles an hour, right? Nobody in front of them, right? So some would argue, well, you can't control how fast they drive or what lane they drive in. That is outside your locus of control. I would argue, well, if I get up next to them and scream and yell at them and then cut them off and brake check them, they might move over out of that lane. So maybe it is within my locus of control to move them. Now, I have to be aggressive to do it, but it is within my locus of control. So that whole what is under your control, again, somebody's on the phone in the movie theater, right? And they're talking loudly during a movie on their phone. Some people would argue, well, that's outside of you can't control that. Yeah, I can. I can go over there and snatch that phone out of that guy's hand. I mean, there's lots of things that I can do. Not legally, not ethically or morally, but it is within my locus of control. So this is an interesting point of debate. Sometimes we argue about it in class, so that's kind of the both sides of it. But I struggle with this. I guess I'm a bit of a control freak, and I feel like everything is somewhat within my control. Because that's the job. When you're a police officer, you're told go into that chaos and regain peace. You're a peace officer. That's what you do. You go into chaos and you create peace. So you're literally told that's what you do, right? Everything is your locus of control. Like you are the guy to regain control of a situation that has gotten out of control. So it's hard to get that out of your system. And it's why so many off-duty police officers will get in trouble because they'll interject themselves into a situation because you feel a duty to do so, and the next thing you know, it goes sideways, and you're out of a job because of something that you did off-duty. So this is an interesting topic for me. And then finally, and this is just to dispel a pop psychology myth. So we've probably heard, oh, that he's a type A personality, right? And people think that that's psychology. It's actually not. There were two cardiologists back in the 70s, Friedman and Rosenman, and they proposed that there were two distinct personality types. And this is another one of those situations where the original theory had two, and then people came afterwards and they wanted to build on the shoulders, and so they added something to it. But the original was just type A and type B. And what they found was that people that had cardiac issues always kind of had the same personality. They were always like, go, 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 very impatient, excessive competitiveness, kind of hostile, a bit angry, just very tightly wound. And that sort of makes sense, right? That all elevates blood pressure. Obviously, that puts more strain and wear and tear on your heart, and so your heart wears out faster. And the people, they realized, we never, ever have patients that have heart issues that are just super relaxed and easygoing and just happy and, just very pleasant people. Like, we don't see people like that in our office. That's like a different kind of personality, and obviously, it's conducive to better health because we don't see them. So that whole type A, type B personality actually has nothing to do with psychology, and it was two cardiologists that came up with that. You won't ever hear psychologists, use that in research. It's just not it's a pop psychology thing. So the type D is people who exhibit chronic emotional distress combined with a tendency to suppress negative emotions. I know nothing about that. I've never even heard of a type D person, so I came across that. I don't know if it was in the book or not, but anyway, not something I'm interested in studying. So if you want to look into it, Google it. Anyways, all right, that's the chapter. So, man, we're trucking right along here. We got two more left, and then we're done. Y'all have a good week, and I will talk to y'all later.